Hey everybody, welcome into week 5 of our There Is More group discussion. Myself and Pastor Weston are here to kind of run through some of these questions for some of you leaders that are watching before your group to kind of get an idea of the direction that we're going this week. And then if you missed your group and were sent this by your group leader, feel free after each question when we kind of pose the question to pause and think to yourself and write some things down and then maybe listen to kind of where our heads are at and help supplement there and take some notes. So dual purpose with this whole thing, but we're going to run through these and try not to take too much of your time, but give you something good to begin to create some discussion and go through this week. So the first thing about this week, we talked about God's reward and what that looks like. And so some of the key things to remember: it's not about equal contribution. The book says it's about equal sacrifice, but we discussed this in our roundtable, changing that a little bit to it's about equal obedience, because we believe, and I think I've seen in my life as well, and we talk about with Mr. Chucky and Miss Joanne's story, that many times we feel in the moment it's a sacrifice or giving something up, but when we look back, it's really just putting something aside to receive what God really had for us and choosing between the two. Number 2, as a member of God's family, when you do your part, your life changes. God always works in us as He's working through us. And then when you're in Jesus, your legacy keeps going even after you're gone. So some things to keep in mind as we discuss today. So number 1, Pastor Weston, what do you think of when you hear the word legacy?
Yeah, so for those who may be watching, your group leader sent you this, and that'd be a great time to pause, and then I'll get into the answer. But to me, like, legacy is always something that I feel like my pastor, my leader, taught me is, and he posed it this way: is your legacy worth following? It's something to consider. We talked about this in our staff meeting today, that you're always leaving behind a legacy. Like, there will always be, just right there in the big idea, the opening section, it talks about the word of God will never pass away. It will always be here. Well, how will you be remembered? Like, that's a perfect question to ask yourself. Like, when you're going through this life, how do people remember you when you walk out of the room or when you leave from this life into the next, and you go into eternity? Man, how will you be remembered? I think, for example, I want my children to remember me as being a good father, my wife to remember me as being a good husband. So what are the things that you're doing today that you can pass down to the next generation, to those around you maybe watching? I think are critical things to remember and take in mind. But when it comes to legacy, everybody's looking, everybody's needing something to follow. So is your legacy worth following, or is it like, well, you know what, that person needs some help. Maybe I don't need to follow in their footsteps or do what they do. Maybe I need to do something else in regards to what God is calling me to do.
And Pastor Weston, being the great communicator that he is, hit 1 and 2 there with what do you want your personal legacy to be, which is great. Sure. Because that kind of, once you begin that conversation, those things just kind of come up. But one other thing on number 1 that we talked about this morning, if you're not sure what your legacy may already be, because we talked about this too, you're leaving a legacy. Yep. Like you are. So it's up to us to decide what legacy we're going to leave, because you're going to no matter what. So a simple question to ask: what do people think or even feel when my name comes up? Like, when people think about me, when somebody is asked about me, what feelings do they get? What do they think? Is it a sense of dread? Is it a sense of, oh my gosh, I really don't feel they're going to, whatever? Or is it, man, they're just so kind, they're so loving? What? Maybe that's a good place to evaluate. Yeah. Maybe ask somebody close to you. A spouse will tell you. Somebody, a mother will usually tell you. Somebody close to you that you know is going to really be honest with you. Hey, in terms of legacy, what comes to mind? What do you feel when my name comes up? And then the second thing on leaving a legacy, because sometimes it feels like, oh, what is the end result of all of my life? As Pastor Megan said, what do people say at your funeral? Right. That's a little big, and that's true. That's part of your legacy, how you're remembered when you're gone. But we discussed this with the teenagers yesterday, because they had the same idea, like, man, I'm 15. What are we talking about legacy for, right? But think about people that were in your life for just a season, that you knew for 1 year. but you still remember those people, and you still remember things that they said, you still remember things they did, how they made you feel when you were around them, that's their legacy with you.
Yeah.
So we're always leaving a legacy with somebody, especially if you're out wearing a New Hope hat. You're leaving a legacy for you and for New Hope, but also for Jesus. And we talked about this with the students as well, that there's a certain connotation for them at the schools whenever they say, I believe in Jesus, I'm a Christian. And so they're trying to undo some of the things that were left for them. And not such a good way, in the way that Christians are viewed by the people they go to school with. And so the encouragement to them was, okay, well, every interaction you have is impacting the legacy of Jesus at the school. So now when those kids come behind you 4 years from now, your little brother comes to school and he claims Jesus too, Christianity and Jesus is thought of in a different way because of you, because of the legacy that you left at your school.
Yeah, because you're representing Jesus to someone. So wherever you are, whatever you're doing, I love how you said that. I think Pastor Micah mentioned that every interaction that you have has a potential to affect someone's eternity. And so you've got to be mindful of the legacy that you leave behind. I also want to say this. I want to debunk the myth of that it's got to be downward, maybe in an age range. Like, yeah, sure, there's always people looking up to you, but that doesn't necessarily always mean that it's got to be someone younger looking to the old. Yeah, that's natural. That happens naturally. But there are several different people around you now today that may be peers or maybe even people that are older than you that are looking to you for leadership, guidance, wisdom, and it's your legacy that you're leaving around. When you're not there, what are you being known for?
I think we shared Dakota's story. Pastor Chris shared it on Sunday. We shared it at our leadership commitment event. And how this 18, 19-year-old kid's story impacted and moved others to the point of, man, where am I? Where am I not being obedient to God? If he is, then how much more should I, right? And so number 2, we kind of answered a little bit, what do we want our personal legacies to be? You can pause, take some time to discuss that if you're with your group, or think about it of yourself. I think that's another good place to ask, somebody else, like, hey, what is my current, like, and how can I change that? What do I need to do in order to change maybe some areas where I'm not leaving such a good legacy? So take some time to do that as we go on to number 3. Number 3 is, what is the spiritual legacy we are passing on to the next generation at New Hope? And yesterday I mentioned we talked with the teenage boys. One of the young guys, he said, man, when I think of New Hope, I think of it's a place for anybody to belong. Everybody is welcome. And so for some people, when New Hope is mentioned, it's going to bring up a different thought or a different feeling, and it's going to be a little bit different for everybody. Our goal as a staff, our goal as church leadership, and I think should then be everybody's goal that's a part of this body of believers we have here locally at New Hope, is that they should all kind of hit on some of the same things that you see in Scripture, right? Being a place to belong, being a place for family, being a place where outreach and healing and freedom can all take place and all those types of things. But it's going to look different to everybody because everybody comes in a different stage of life, needing something different from God, searching for something different.
So I'm not going to belabor this point. I do want to encourage those who are watching, it's for a group leader, this would be a perfect time. Tell a story about something that happened at New Hope that makes New Hope what it is, that it gives off the legacy that New Hope has, especially in this community. Tell a story, ask for stories, whatever that looks like. Pastor Chris just talked about it just like Saturday at our ladies' luncheon event that we had, a guy coming down the street looking for something, just anything.
Literally praying, God, show me
give
something.
Me a sign, something. And God revealed to him to come here, just right up the road, come here. And he would see a man at a stop sign. Sure enough, who's in the parking lot? Pastor Chris. And so it's stories like that New Hope is known for its welcoming atmosphere, the hope that it gives off, the light, the beacon, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I want you guys to go around, tell a story. Think of a story right now as you're driving, or maybe you're watching or listening, whatever it may be. Think of a story right now and just think to yourself, wow, this is the legacy that New Hope has.
Yeah. And we shared Mr. Chucky and Miss Joanne's story, and we kind of switched it up a little bit from the book. So their story is actually in week 6 in the book, if you want to go and read that. Or if you want to go back and watch our live stream on Facebook and see it again. And Apolonia's story is actually, we're going to show that next week in service, even though it's this week in the book. But they're all so good, so we just put them wherever. But I think the legacy also starts with people like them, and Joey and Gwen Johnson, and Joe and Debbie Guillory, and Linda and Gus Miller, and Miss Cheryl Manuel, and so many others that I know I'm leaving out, that have just been faithful over decades, praying for God to move, and the excitement when they're seeing their children and grandchildren benefiting from ECA and the expansion that God is doing in the church and all those types of things. So, leading us into number 4. What is our There Is More journey really about? How would you describe what we are doing? And so if you're doing this on your own, you can pause, take some time to think through that. If you're watching it as a group, then you can pause, take time to discuss that. But Pastor Weston, how would you describe it? What are we really doing?
Sure. For me, I simply wrote, it's faith building. It's faith building. I said this in our roundtable the other day. For us, it's not just building a project, it's building our faith. It's building healthy and honorable conversations that really, to me, catapult us in the right direction, catapult us in a trajectory that is totally focused on God, being obedient, hearing His voice, and it's a great season to be in because it's building our faith and our relationship with Jesus through this journey.
Once again, and he came out with some great stuff yesterday. The teenager in that teenage group yesterday, he said, I feel like we are responding to God's call to go higher, to go deeper, to do more. And yeah, a lot of this obviously is financially focused in a lot of the message and things, because we're heading somewhere that costs money. But honestly, as you said, stretching faith, living by faith, responding to God's call, learning how to hear God's voice. I think it's really just us all responding to God's call for more. In our personal life, and our personal spiritual relationship and journey with God, and our family. What does God have more of for our community, for this area, for our church, for this school, for ECA, and everything involved in it? And I think it's all of us just coming together saying, okay, man, over the past 7 years, Mr. Chucky, over the past 46 years, God has been doing some incredible stuff. We sense God is leading us to another step, to something more. And that's going to take all of us looking into ourselves. God, what do you have for me? What part do you have me to play? And that's going to look different for each and every one of us. But I think it's all of us learning how to recognize God's voice and respond in obedience, and allowing God to stretch our faith on the other side of that and move through us. And so I've really enjoyed this series so far, the book that we're going through, and all of the stories. We'd love for you, there's a portion in the first 20 pages that if God's been speaking something to you, sharing something, God's done something in you at New Hope in general, or specifically through this series, then we want to hear from you. Scan that QR code and share with us. We love to always know what God is doing in your life and celebrate with you. And so we look forward to closing out next week with week 6. We hope you're enjoying your groups, and we love you guys, and we'll see you on the next one.